Hi, we're Oxygen Conservation, and this is the Sororum Sessions. Charlotte, welcome to the Sororum Sessions.
Thank you for having me.
You've got the opening question.
I have. I wanted
Shoot,
to ask you a question because I think this sits at the heart of everything that we do, which is, could you tell me a little bit about how you've built resilience as a new business owner and being in a sort of forefront of a new area?
Oh, great question. Over time. Mm-hmm. So a few different topics to talk about. I've been practicing running a business since before I knew what one was. So I always remember washing dishes in a hotel kitchen in my early teens, rearranging the cutlery stack to make it wash more efficiently for no reason. That didn't benefit me. No one asked me to. I just didn't know how not to fix things. So that was a part of my brain that was always doing it. And I always also found myself in leadership positions, whether I wanted to or not. So captaining sports teams early on. I captained the Great Britain American football team in my first season playing for it, having no idea what I was doing. And years later, I said to the head coach, what on earth did you do that for? And his view was, you just outworked everyone else and no one else could say they couldn't do it with how hard you were working. It was that role modeling side of it. So you pick up each of these skill sets as you go. And over the last 15 plus years of my career, as I've gone through each different chapter, managed to surround myself with brilliant people that give me the support I need to do that. So two best friends in the world who both work in the business now. One is a PhD in performance psychology. So I've had a therapist on speed dial for more than a decade and I've needed him. I've got the exact opposite personality to me as another best friend who is a head of operations, who is logical, who deals with the health and safety, the nuts and bolts, the worrying. So it allows me to be free and creative with ideas. And the other one is I have an amazing wife who is the balance, the absolute balance. So we met outside a nightclub at a friend's birthday while at university, and I was being too cocky and obnoxious. And she tapped me on the shoulder and said, "Shut up, nobody cares." And that was one of the two best bits of advice she ever gave me. The second was, it's okay being cleverer than everybody else. It's not okay showing off about it. And that's kind of the crux of this podcast. So that's why I talk less now and listen more, to be more open to those ideas. The other bit is finding the systems and processes that work for you. So my day, if I'm at home, I wake up, I lift weights before daylight, and then I can hit my day. So if I start it with something really hard and challenging, and I don't like being on my own. I'm someone that surrounds myself with people and ideas, and I'm a very extrovert thinker in terms of, it's rare I'll make a decision without bouncing it off someone because I want different views and perspectives and work that way, and I get energy from those people. So the gym is the one bit where I'm on my own and focused and doing that. And I guess the other part of it is balancing my time and energy levels by, I'm not good at doing the same thing for a long period of time. So if we've been on the road for 3 days, I want to be home for a day, but I don't want to be at home for 4 days. So that variation and variety, I think that's kind of how I've got to resilience, if I've got any. I mean, everyone's got a bar.
Yeah.
Abby, who sat behind the camera, she asked me this yesterday about whether I feel overwhelmed by an amount of work. I think everyone does. It's just it's a bit like squatting in the gym. There's a weight that everyone can't lift, but over time, the capacity you have to lift improves, I think. How do you do it?
Embracing uncomfortable situations. So,
do you know who Ross Edgley is?
Yes.
Yeah.
So I always talk about, I train physically as well. Like I recognize that I'm not the sort of person who can just sit, at a desk staring at a screen for hours on end. I have to break it up. I have to get out. I have to be able to share my thoughts and ideas. I do have to bounce them around, but I also generate ideas through putting myself into different situations. That's why I love, so last year I gave myself the ridiculous kind of goal of doing a competition every month, but not the same competition, not the same kind of physical competition. So I had to train in different ways over and over again. So I was doing brutal races, which is kind of running through mud and ice and water. And then I was doing like farm fitness races, which is like CrossFit. I was doing high rocks. I did nuclear fit, doubles and singles. So I was just kind of throwing myself, and some, for instance, I wouldn't have a competition set up and I'd just join a team at the last minute. I had no idea where I was going. I didn't know the team or anything, but I loved that because it gave me so much resilience. It gave me the ability to say, and have the confidence to say, actually, do you know what? If this feels difficult, I know I can get through it because I've done this before. And that, when you're starting up a business and when you're going into a new area and you're pushing at the forefront, you're always going to get resistance. You're going to get resistance from people who don't like being out of their comfort zone. They don't want to do something new. They feel threatened by it. And you have to challenge yourself. Can I get myself through this? Can I push through? And I've had the same thing with the business. With no matter how successfully things are going, you have cash flow issues, you have problems with supply, whatever it is, there's firefighting going on all around the place. And the one thing we don't always talk about is how much resilience you need to have to be able to come through that, and also the ability to regulate your emotions, to actually say, in the moment, I'm feeling like this, I need to take a step back, or I need somebody else who can help balance me so that I can get back to making, pragmatic, thoughtful decisions in the way that I typically would. And so there are lots of different things that help achieve that balance. But I think what you said about, how we've developed is really, really important. I went through a lot of challenges growing up. I think, like you, first person to get through A-levels, first person to get a degree in my family. I didn't have anyone in my family to talk, no one had been a chief exec. No one had, worked in, finance in the city. No one had done a degree. Everything was first time. So you're breaking new ground all the time, and you have to go outside of your comfort zone to find mentors for yourself, which in and of itself is quite challenging, which is why now, when I look for people coming into the business or people to work with, I don't necessarily just look for the grades. I look for the stories. How have you overcome things? How have you managed to get that grade? It may not be the best grade, but for what you've had to go through, that grade is amazing.
This is going to be good. So many people talk about needing role models to see in places, but you didn't have any. You charted your own course. Why didn't you need role models? And
somebody asked me this question on a podcast, and we were talking about high rocks and a whole number of things, and why on earth I'd put myself through that. And the one thing I sort of came up with, and this has probably grown over time as I've grown confidence, is that I am my role model. If I don't have someone around me who has created a standard or a benchmark, I'm not going to allow that to limit me. So I develop my own theory of change for myself, and I say, I want to meet that standard. It doesn't matter what I've experienced. What I've experienced is what I've experienced. I have to own that. But I can also choose to be different. I can choose to push myself. And that's quite brave, I think, and quite courageous, because it's hard to do that. And there are lots of people in our industry that I could look to, and I do, for different dimensions. But often I don't find somebody who actually fully encompasses everything, and you have to make yourself into that role model. And more than anything, we all do this. Whatever we say, we do it for our kids, right? We do it for the next generation. And the reason why I focus particularly on pensions is because of the long term, but because it's, pensions are a social contract between generations. They only exist on the basis somebody else is funding them. So I think I need to be the role model for my children. And if I didn't have the role model for me, then I can create a break in the cycle through our family, and I can be that new role model.
That is a beautiful segue into me asking you to tell people who you are and what you do.
Sure. So I'm Charlotte O'Leary. I'm the Chief Exec of Pensions for Purpose. At the heart, we're a membership organisation, but what we're trying to do is to get pension funds, their advisors and asset managers to integrate impact. So environmental and social impact into the way they think, operate and invest. So it's not enough that you just create solutions on impact investment. It has to be integrated into everything you do as a business. And so when I came into the business, we as a team decided to become a B Corp. We're a profit for purpose business. We didn't go along the traditional route, which is, what you have to be philanthropic to do this. We've spurned that, and we've said, no, you can absolutely make a profit from doing something impactful. And we are 100% female managed. We're majority female owned, so we all own the business. We don't have any external investors.
How many is we all?
Three of us. Nice. In total, we're a business of 12, so we're growing all the time. But we've done things differently right from the start. It's all been about sustainability and impact, and not just in one part of our business, in absolutely everything that we do. And we constantly put the mirror up, and ask ourselves the question: are we doing enough?
If you were talking to the next generation out there about what they should know about their pensions right now, give us some of that. What would you teach them and hope that they know?
I think there really are two different dimensions to this. There's how you're investing for yourself, and then there's what you're investing in. So two of my biggest concerns about finance generally for individuals, particularly in the UK, is that most people are not engaged with their pension, but they're also not contributing enough. So we moved from defined benefit to defined contribution schemes.
Can you help explain that to people who are not familiar? So
defined benefit are final salary schemes that used to be offered by employers that put in the full contribution. So therefore, you had a guaranteed amount of money. Whatever you retired on would be the amount that you would receive in terms of a pension income. Defined contribution is exactly that. It's determined by the amount that you contribute, which means the lower the contributions, the lower your pension is going to be in retirement. So this idea that you can replicate your salary in retirement is actually really worrying concern, because most people are only putting in a contribution via their employer and themselves, so about 8%. Now, in Australia, to give you a comparison, they're putting in double digits, 18%. And if you look at the living pension standard, which has been brought out by the Living Wage Foundation, they say we should be at a minimum saving 12%. So we are very, very low down in terms of pension contributions. The PLSA, the Pensions Lifetime Savings Association, has said that only 3% of millennials will reach the moderate retirement standard. Only 3%. 71% of baby boomers will reach it. So we've got this massive intergenerational unfairness building up in the system. So the first thing that I would say is we need people to engage in their pensions. And really see long-term saving as something that's worthwhile for them. Now, the reason why that's hard is because most of them can't afford to get on the housing ladder. Most of them are facing a cost of living crisis. Most of them don't have any short-term rainy day savings. And so therefore it makes you very, very focused on the short term and not the long term. Which is why I think employers particularly need to step up and they need to contribute. I don't think you're a sustainable business if your employees are potentially going to retire into poverty. I'd like anybody to, explain to me the business case for that, because I don't think you can say you're a sustainable business. So as a business, we ourselves constantly put up our contributions each year in recognition of that, because we've recognised it's not always fair to expect individuals to be able to do that when they're facing such constraints. So that's the first element. We need to get people to engage in pensions, but we need employers to step up. And the second element is then what you're investing in. So most people in the defined contribution pension scheme, for the generation we're talking about, will be invested in a default. They won't even know what that default is invested in, but it could be invested in tobacco, it could be invested in munitions, although most aren't, conflict minerals, oil and gas. And the thing is, you could be doing all these things at home, to mitigate this, but actually what you're investing in via your pension fund is helping to exacerbate a lot of those problems. Because most of the options outside of the default are the ones that are sustainable. That's part of the difficulty. So we've got this disconnect. And most pension fund trustees, the people who are taking that sort of fiduciary duty, that responsibility for member outcomes, say that actually members don't engage in their pension. And I think although people may not want to engage on finance, because we don't do financial education either very well here, I think they would engage if they knew it was going to have a positive impact on people and planet. So I think that's a really good way to engage members. The thing that I was mentioning to Abby before we started this shoot was that your pension is 21 times more effective at solving things like climate change and biodiversity loss than anything you do in your own home. So actually, if you were going to focus on anything, forget the reusable bags, and actually just focus on your pension fund. So that's how important it is.
You mentioned we don't do financial education well here. Is there an example of where it is done well?
I think the Nordics definitely are very, very good in this sort of area. And there are examples in this country. So I've done some volunteering for Red Start because I really do believe in financial education from a young age. So I studied psychology. As part of that, I studied child development. And the ages at which we were most susceptible to changing behavioural habits are between the ages of 5 and 7. But we don't do any financial education. We might learn about the Vikings and the Anglo-Saxons and all sorts of other things, which may or may not be helpful when we're thinking about setting up a business or a bank account, but we don't teach them about how to manage their finances, something fundamental. So, my daughter will come up to me and say, Mum, can I have this? Can you just pay for it? Look, just get your phone and tap it on there. So, I've spent a lot of time explaining, to my daughter and my son where money comes from, how you earn it, how long it takes to earn it, how you pay for things, what it means to save, what delayed gratification is about. And those principles are just lacking.
How old are your kids?
5 and 7.
5 and 7. Mine are 8 and 5.
Okay, yep.
I was very poor as growing up. And how do I balance the desire to teach the kids the value of money and give them the chip on the shoulder that drove me to be able to do stuff with giving them a nicer and a better experience than I had? Because my childhood was pretty horrible. How do you find the balance?
I had an interesting kind of I think we're similar in a number of ways.
And that hasn't been lost on me either.
No, I had to save everything. I started working when I was 14. If I wanted to go on holiday, that was me. If I wanted a car, I was going to pay for that. My degree, and it made me probably quite tough in some ways, in a way that I want to hold back from my children.
Yeah.
But I also want them to understand and appreciate the value of work and grafting, because I know the resilience that it's given me, and obviously it's given you. So it is a sort of tough balancing act. A lot of people say, as parents now, particularly, we feel that our jobs is to make our children happy, and that isn't what it's about. We're there to help make them resilient. It's only going to get harder, with climate change, biodiversity loss, economic inequality. All of these things are going to make it much harder for the next generation. We've just talked about effective pension fund crisis. We need to set them up in the best way to be able to handle that. And that's why I think being able to bring in the challenges and help to explain with empathy, I think the empathy is the key part. I didn't get a lot of empathy growing up. I don't know about you. And I had to sort of build and work on that. And that's the bit that I inject, with my children. If they're feeling anxious or worried about something, I will talk to them, I'll comfort them, I'm there for them. But ultimately, I also support them to make their own decisions. They need to be able to withstand that anxiety, without me resolving it for them.
Nice. You talked about where your money's invested. I've been reading and thinking a lot about divestment at the moment from certain industries. Help me understand your perspective on that.
It's so interesting because, as with so many things, with human behaviour and how we look at things, we think of things as dichotomies. It's either this or it's this. And one of the things that I talk about with investments is, to the extent that you can, it doesn't make sense to engage. Engage with companies in order to try and change behaviour. The problem is, like anything, we're talking about parenting and things like that. If there's no red line, it doesn't really matter. It doesn't hold any weight. So the other thing to think about is, if you withhold money from a public company and recycle that investment into a private company that actually disrupts that public company, that might be a better strategy, for example, rather than just saying it's either engagement or divestment. I think you've actually got a third option, which is you can maintain some sort of investment, because the other thing we've got to remember is, if it's not you invested in it, it's going to be someone else who doesn't care, potentially. So I think sometimes maintaining an investment is good, but also having the option to invest in disruptors is another potential option and a good way of hedging.
I've been thinking about the idea. So we're going to bring our first edition of carbon credits to market this year, with the intention of it being the premium offering in that space, the most authentic, auditable, accountable, visitable, the real carbon credits, set a new bar, do for the carbon markets what the Tesla Model S did for electric vehicles, to make it credible and realistic. We've already had approaches from fossil fuel companies about buying those, and my answer would have been absolutely not, you're not doing it. But the idea of exploring that, wearing an activist partner hat to say, okay, we can talk about this, but the standards are high, the commitments have to be met, there's consequences for not, and doing it as a way of having a better conversation is something I'm open to doing now that I wasn't 12 months ago. I still think it's hard. I still think I'll take a lot of pressure for doing that, and there's a lot of conversations to have with the team, because it's all of us that's representing. And the easiest one is to go, no, that's terrible, don't do it. But there's so many things in this sector that in the environment sector, that we haven't achieved because we've tried to treat the world as absolute black and whites, and it's rarely that way.
Yeah, and it's a transition, right? This is about transition finance. If we were to take an absolute objective of net zero, you wouldn't invest in emerging markets. Now that's problematic, as anyone can tell, and that's part of the issue that we have. So a lot of our work has been about looking at real world impact via emerging markets. It's no good as a pension fund setting yourself a net zero target and effectively achieving that target by withdrawing any investment from emerging markets, because in the short term that doesn't get you to your net zero target, because in terms of real world impact you're not actually having the effect that you want to have. So we try to come at this from all angles, and I think your point about we have to have engagement, that's important, and you have to be in the room, but you have to also be pushing. It can't be enough that they're interested to do it because it somehow helps from a sort of greenwashing perspective. It has to be that as part of this is about transitioning your mindset and the way you fundamentally operate as a business. The reason why carbon credits works for you is because you started off with a business on the foundations that you have. It's about sustainability first and foremost. It's the same thing for pensions for purpose. The only thing we do is impact. If somebody comes to me and says, yes, but you could continue to proliferate events because they make money, that's not a good enough argument for me. It has to meet a need. It has to create positive impact. Otherwise, why on earth are we doing it? And really, the only thing that creates that impetus is having a chief exec who believes it. So if you want to get people on board who want to buy your carbon credits, make sure that the chief exec is on board. That's the key thing. Get the board involved. I'm so fed up of having to be taken to a head of sustainability who can talk about sustainability, but their chief exec can't. That just is nonsense to me. If you don't understand sustainability as a chief exec, you've got a real problem as a business. I just was never one of those people who could just sit for hours on end. To be honest, I feel sorry for anyone who can, staring at a screen. It's just not natural for any of us to do. You need to be able to break it up with other things. So I do walks, or I go running, because in order to stimulate ideas, you need to put yourself into different situations. You don't stimulate ideas by sitting people in a controlled environment where they're constantly getting the same stimuli. So I try and change things up. And the reason why I've been able to do this is because at Pensions for Purpose, I have helped create an environment where we play to people's strengths. We don't try to set a kind of universal standard, a cookie cutter approach for everybody works. And that makes such a difference. I haven't been diagnosed myself, but often where you've got a child who has ADHD or autism, there's an overlap because it's hereditary, 9 times out of 10. And I was always told, at companies that I've worked for, Charlotte, you've got too many ideas. You're always trying to tinker around your roles. Why can't you just stay in your lane? These are your, and I would just, it just wasn't me. It wasn't how I operate. I was always kind of going outside and going, yeah, but this doesn't make any sense. We could create efficiencies here. That's not your role, Whereas at Pensions for Purpose, I don't get any of that. There's none of, could you control yourself? Or could you try and only do a handful of things? I don't think like that. I'm an ideas person. I get told all the time I'm like a million steps ahead of everyone else. The one thing I have worked on is how to bring people along with me on that journey rather than going from 0 to 100 at about 1 million miles an hour. And ADHD can express itself in lots of different ways. ADHD, autism overlap. But one of the things, some of the characteristics that are inherent with autism are systems thinking. So the ability to think about lots of different things, problem solve in a completely different way. So actually, I've always thought about those things as superpowers. You know, I've never thought about these things as disorders. There are deficits, but there are amazing things that you can do with it if you harness it.
Usain Bolt's really good at sprinting.
Yeah.
He's not good at deadlifting or bench press, probably. So there's an overdeveloped skill in one area will inherently lead to some problem deficit. I loved something you said earlier on in the episode, and good luck the editors pulling this together into one piece. So we might give them some structure in a minute. But you said about recruitment. I look at the bottom of a CV first. I have a fast track. If someone is an international athlete, has done some kind of incredible challenge or achievement of some kind, they get an interview, because if they've achieved the impossible and they want to be here, they will succeed, because they have demonstrated that they can do it. If they want to achieve that, they can do it. So it's fascinating you said about a similar approach for that story, that narrative, because we're hugely blessed at the minute. So we average now 150 applicants for every role. And so we've hired 20 people publicly, and we've had 3,000 applications, because for lots of the things you talk about, because we have a culture that is open and as transparent as possible. You know, we are a playful team that take the piss a lot, but that only works because I'm the butt of most of the jokes. Because otherwise it's bullying.
Yeah.
If the most senior person is like, no, I'm beyond jokes. No, I need to get most of it. Otherwise it's not okay.
No.
And also, what really scares me running a business is if you don't get that, because if you're not getting jokes, you're not getting the truth. No. And you need a way of making sure that information flows. And actually, as we've become bigger and more well-known and more successful, the team's like, I can't spend as much time with every person. No. One of the things that I am acutely aware of is that you're going to get less information. You'll get more signals from people around the team, but people will try and protect your time and help you with the volume of stuff. But it does lead to less of a full spectrum of information, which is something I don't love, but I'm having to adapt to and adjust. We've talked a little bit about climate and nature and the sort of wider environmental piece. How does the pension sector currently think about climate and the environment, if it does at all?
How do I want to come at this? Do I want to... In a way, the reason why we exist is because there's been a massive gap. You know, our success is a demonstration of a failure, right? A failure in understanding, a failure of marrying fiduciary duty, the kind of obligation to provide benefits to pension scheme members, and the understanding of that, which is not about maximising risk-adjusted returns over the short term, but unfortunately has led to that.
Because you always hear that from the trustees, that is our role and our job. We have to do that. Is that true?
So what's interesting about this is a few different factors that play into why they think that. So just to kind of step back a little bit, the UK pension fund market is very fragmented. You've got a long tail of small schemes. You've got, thousands of schemes in the UK. In the Netherlands, you've got less than 300 schemes, to give you an idea. So in terms of the efficiency to manage those, it's significantly more efficient, which means that doing sustainability, doing impact is much easier. So you've got to also understand the kind of background to why it's so challenging. Those trustees are limited in time, so they might have quarterly meetings. They might have slightly more than those if they're looking at particular issues, but that's the reality, and those governance structures haven't necessarily changed. Even though we now know all of these different things about climate, about biodiversity loss, about economic inequality, and that's the difficulty. We're challenged on time, but then it's also incentive misalignment. So pension funds don't just act as one actor in a system; they rely on advisors because of that lack of time. So investment consultants, legal firms, independent advisors. Which means that, yes, they're making decisions, but they're making decisions based on the information that's provided to them by companies that have short-term outlooks. So if you looked at any of the investment consultants, you could start to see it's quite heterogeneous in terms of the type of businesses they are. You know, how many of them are B Corps? How many of them are trying to embed sustainability and impact? And if you're not trying to do that as an investment consultant, how are you providing that in your advice to pension funds? So if you don't have that alignment, there's a problem. Then you look at asset managers. So asset managers, again, many of them will have shareholders unless they're private businesses. They've got short time horizons. They're meeting quarterly. And sustainability impact takes a long time. You know, we're talking about, 10 years plus. So there's a mismatch between the time horizons of the different stakeholders involved. Pension funds have long time horizons, which is why we all turn around and say they should be able to do private investments. They should be able to invest in infrastructure. They should be able to invest in things.
It's the logical alignment with nature because it is long-term and generational.
But all of the people they rely on in order to execute those investments have short time horizons. So in a recent evidence session that I gave to the Work and Pension Select Committee about climate change risk and fiduciary duty, because they were talking about whether changes need to be made to the law effectively, I said that there isn't actually anything in the law that isn't permissive. It's not its permissibility that's the problem. It's the system and the interpretation. So the interpretation has been that we need to be able to maximise short-term risk-adjusted returns. And when we say risk-adjusted returns, many of them are not necessarily thinking of climate change, or biodiversity loss and economic inequality as risks. So that's part of the issue.
But the system allows them to, it's just they're not choosing to at the moment?
Well, and no, this is part of the problem. There is still a mismatch.
Right.
So if you go to, and I'm not going to name names, but if you go to an asset manager, unless they are a specific impact manager or a sustainability manager, they'll have a whole suite of investment products. Now, maybe a small fraction of them will be sustainability or impact focused, but they're not all focused on that. And yet, sustainability and impact is absolutely intrinsic. You know, we know that environmental, social, and economic factors entirely interrelate. But the difficulty is the premise upon which we've built our models. So economic models, standard economic theory has been built 1950s, 1970s by largely white, middle-aged men focused on traditional macro and microeconomics. If you look to today, you can point to like Dr. Kay Rayworth and donut economics. Very, very different way of thinking. But what we have to understand is that's not the standard that's being used. It's not the standard that was used for modern portfolio theory upon which most people develop investment portfolios. So the problem is our starting point is often wrong. So when we're talking to pension funds, they'll be thinking of sustainability or impact as closer to philanthropy. Which it isn't. It doesn't mean concessionary returns. And we've done some research on this that actually shows that impact funds over the long term do produce market rate risk-adjusted returns. So it's this mindset that is ingrained. And we also have to include in that diversity in trustee boards. We don't see, members of pension schemes often, particularly younger generations looking to become trustees. And as much as trustee boards can try to be effective around DE&I, we're always influenced by our own backgrounds and circumstances. If that's not a mix, you're not going to get that mindset. And if those trustees are older, and many of them are retiring on a defined benefit pension scheme themselves, it can be very hard to see outside of their own kind of perimeter, if you like. So there are a number of different things that are happening that means it isn't just one answer. But my frustration with the way that we're dealing with sustainability impact at the moment is we're sort of shirking responsibility, for the different actors. And we need to get the system to align. So one of my key asks has been, we need clarity around fiduciary duty to say that climate change, biodiversity loss, economic inequality, are all factors that should be considered because they pose risks. Yes, we need to monitor for the point at which they get priced into the market, but we have to recognise those risks.
And treat them as equal risks that are
Yes.
not, oh, they're fluffy, nice risks that we should talk about. No, these are fundamental,
Yes.
catastrophic failures of the planet if we don't.
Yes. You don't have a financial system. You don't have any pensions. If the world's on fire, it's just, it's like the Easter Islanders. You keep chopping down the trees. Guess what? You get to the point where there's no more trees, no more people. So if anybody's read Jared Diamond's book Collapse, which talks about the collapse of basically every empire, it's one of the consistent things we have managed to achieve, which is continual collapse of empires. We should learn something from this. We try to get too big, we grow too fast, we collapse. And a little bit like Gordon Brown's nod to breaking, boom and bust, there's a point at which we need to stop being so arrogant as well about our role and our ability to dictate what happens with nature and with the climate. And we need to understand that we are not the masters of it, but often the people on the receiving end, and we need to treat it as such.
That segues beautifully into my world, and a lot of the challenges that we get on a sort of weekly basis are people who think nature should be constrained and managed and manicured and tidied up. So we'll acquire an estate, we'll try and integrate and work with neighbours as best as possible, but without fail, one or two will be like, well, your land's not tidy anymore. You need to trim that hedge. You need to cut that grass within an inch of its life. No, we're a conservation organisation. We are giving nature space and restoring natural processes, and things have moved on a lot, I think, in the last couple of years. So go back 3 or 4 years, the word rewilding was such a polarising thing. We wouldn't even talk about it. We'd talk about restoring natural processes, because I always thought the language should be a facilitator, not a barrier.
Yep.
And you have to be really, really angry to be against the concept of nature. We've found some people that are. We've found some people that are. Yeah, really, I don't like trees. Okay, great. It's so fascinating that we just want to control and manicure and box everything, where actually we need to be more comfortable to allow nature to work with nature and be part of it. The phrase natural capital, so the concept of the air around us, the water, the elements of life itself, and that being a product-based system, so carbon credits, BNG credits. How much is natural capital in that sense starting to get into the vernacular of pension funds?
I think what's been positive is that you don't want to have to rely on the stick. I'm always more for the carrot than the stick when it comes to changing behaviour. But with pension funds, particularly in the UK, and we have been progressive here, we've brought in things like the Task Force for Climate-related Financial Disclosures. So all the large pension schemes have had to start to report according to a TCFD. And now we've had the launch of the Task Force for Nature-related Financial Disclosures. We've had some great schemes, particularly the local government pension scheme seems much further on this. So, for instance, Brunel adopted the scheme, adopted the framework straight away. And they don't necessarily have to. It's not mandatory at this point. But I think it's brilliant that focus on transparency, albeit we can all punch holes in things and say, well, actually, all these people are doing is disclosing without really doing anything. But the disclosure means that we're aware. The disclosure means we're talking about it. It means that more people are looking at it, creating solutions.
It's a step towards.
It is, exactly. And as soon as, we all know what asset managers are like, right? As soon as there's a market opportunity, they will proliferate product as much as they can. So you need to get it out there. You need to familiarise that. And I think we've gone, a long, long way. What we need to do now is to break down some of the barriers around the portfolio construction element that I mentioned. So a lot of what we see about pension funds not necessarily committing to natural capital solutions is because of being burned in the past, with investments into agriculture in Europe, for example, or the States or Australia, or into forestry, because what they're looking at is they're looking through a return lens rather than thinking about this from a sustainability perspective. The reason why a sustainable forestry solution is very, very different to what we were talking about in the past is that they were stripping things out of the earth in order to make it an investable solution. And so what we've got to do is be able to marry up how far we've come and why this is more sustainable now. And there's also being able to understand greenwashing, and there still is greenwashing out there. As an asset manager, just because you've done forestry for years and years and years and then decided to rebrand it as sustainable forestry doesn't mean it is sustainable forestry. So a lot of what we do is try and, not empower, because they already have power, but enable pension funds to ask the right questions that are going to get them to understanding whether it really is a sustainable solution that they're investing in. But it's also about, and you talked about your business and your business model. It's also about asking those questions about the genesis of the organization and how much as a management team you believe in this and you're going to commit to it. Because sustainability means committing right from the outset. It means having those tough discussions with the people you're buying the assets from. And often it means having covenants. It means, making sure that beyond the investment horizon that you've got for that, there is a long-term future for that land beyond, the investment horizon. So it's also about saying, well, what's the alignment between the organization, the asset manager, and the asset?
That's one of our points of differentiation, I think. So one of my mantras that the team gets so sick of is how you do anything is how you do everything. Because if I cannot sit here and advocate for the environment informing every decision you did, if I drove a Lamborghini, it would credibility gone in a heartbeat.
Yeah.
It all matters. How you do anything is how you do everything, and it's why you cannot strip away our environmental background as a business. It is environment first. So as a kid, I threw myself off waterfalls in a kayak. That's how I learned to love the environment. Degree in geography, PhD in data and environmental stuff, a decade with the public sector doing that, and then practically delivering the projects. You've got lots of people, as you said, like the asset managers, they see an opportunity now.
Yes.
The amount of finance professionals that are rushing into this space, wanting conversations with us, trying to associate and greenwash themselves. But, oh no, I've always been about this, I went to this park once. I know. But whereas we've had to learn the other side of it, we've come at it from an environmental perspective, and thanks to some of the amazing people we sort of spoke about earlier, who have been really open to teaching me things about the financial world, I think that's where we're different. We are coming with a pure environmental and social impact model first. And what's really lovely is those principles have just naturally aligned with the exact sort of things you're talking about, without any awareness of that development of the pension industry and things. So timing's so important in life, and I feel very fortunate that oxygen conservation has arrived at the time when it's right to grow a nature-based economy.
Yes.
It feels such an exciting place to be in.
And that's the thing, I think, because of these processes that pension funds are having to go through, because there's so much rigor, they're asking more of the operational questions. They're doing more of the operational due diligence. So, investment due diligence used to be the thing you needed to do. You needed to meet a whole range of different criteria. But the operational due diligence side is just as important, particularly for this sort of thing. How you run yourselves, in what way, what is the alignment? In sustainability, one of the key concerns that I have is actually burnout in people.
Yeah.
It's great that we've looked at climate and then we've looked at natural capital and biodiversity. They aren't somehow separate from social impact. There is no, because there are going to be tension points. There are going to be points where there are conflict between what people want to achieve and what is right for the environment. And we have to recognize that. Some people now have people on the board that represent, nature, represent. And I think there is actually a reason for that, because we are going to see these conflicts. If you look at, and there are some great examples with the supermarkets, so where pension funds have created a net zero target for themselves, they may keep a board on at a supermarket that is reaching their environmental goals. But if they are reaching their environmental goals by depressing wages, is that what we're actually trying to achieve? So I did a presentation on this recently, which was about systems thinking. These are all interconnected risks. You can't choose one SDG or one particular area that you want to focus on and somehow divorce yourself from all the others. The things that are most likely to derail us getting to our climate change goals or biodiversity are actually economic inequality. And all we're doing at the moment is exacerbating economic inequality. So we need to tackle our systems that are letting people down. The reality is, as much as we in this industry might like to talk about putting in air source heat pumps, ground source heat pumps, changing the way that we live our lives and eating more organically. The person on the street at the moment is in a cost of living crisis. Most of them don't have rainy day funds. They're not saving enough for their pensions. You know, they probably won't even get onto the housing ladder. We've got a kind of generation rent that is coming down. So we also need to be humble and step back and recognize that our views around electric vehicles and you get organic produce and all these sorts of things also come from a very kind of upper middle class perspective.
Yeah.
And so we have to start marrying the kind of discourse on climate and biodiversity with social impact.
One of the ways that plays out really clearly for us is, so we're fortunate to have a large number of properties in rural communities, but these are very old properties that residents have been in there multiple years. They're very happy where they are, but from an EPC perspective, so an energy efficiency of that property, they're in a terrible spot. But you have a situation whereby there's no economic way to make these properties perform to a high standard environmentally. And if you did, they wouldn't be affordable for the people that are living in them. So if we did mandate something like we said, right, we want every property to be at an A, or we're going to knock it down and build another one, do we really want to make a lot of people homeless in a rural community when there's already a housing shortage? So there is no ideal in that scenario. Where we've tried to do that is to say, when a property naturally becomes available because someone's decided to move on, or they're ready for a next property, we will renovate that to an economic level as best as we can without taking a house out of housing stock, and then make that step change. Then the Buccleuch estate, which is one of the biggest land holdings in the UK, they do that really nicely. They have the advantage though that they've got like 400 built properties in a very similar geography, so they can move the houses around a bit easier. And also they've even set up their own reclamation yard. When they do improve a property, they'll keep everything on site to be able to use it in a circular principle across their estate. We've got 11 estates all across Britain, which doesn't make it as feasible to operate as efficiently. But I think we have to find those opportunities to improve things and not let an ideology or perfect be the enemy of better.
Exactly. I agree with that completely. So we worked with the Impact Investing Institute and the Good Economy on producing a paper on place-based impact investing, which in my view is one of the best kind of theoretical tools that is now being implemented to unite environmental, social and economic factors. So you're looking at what a place needs. Often what we were seeing from asset managers is they'd say, great, we're adding some social housing to this particular town right on the outskirts that has no connection to the city or to actually helping promote staying within the community. You know, because what we've done in asset management is create asset class silos. We've gone, here's a bucket, here's something that has a risk return profile that looks like X. And what we're going to do is proliferate this over and over again, but not look at the connection between our different assets. So we also encourage asset managers to actually look at their underlying portfolios and have a look at how they can be mutually reinforcing. Like, how can they support each other? What's the theory of change, you know, that underpins that, rather than just having lots of separate.
The environment sector has been so guilty of that. You'd have had a project that was trying to improve a river corridor, for example, but wouldn't consider the knock-on effects of the neighbouring land and things. And that's why now we've been able to put together a portfolio of properties. We have a business model that spans improving the land, creating natural capital products, trying to produce renewable energy at scale, providing homes for people in the rural economy, which will lead to jobs, and an element of regenerative agriculture. So we can't do everything in every place, but across those 11 individual estates and businesses, we can do exactly as what you described there.
Yeah.
I guess my next question is, how can I help? So we're in a very privileged position of having that real portfolio. So lots of people, every week we see someone else announcing that they're going to do something in natural capital, but they're announcing an aspiration, not actually doing something yet. And that's not to criticise them. Please keep being aspirational and do things, but we need action as well. So we're really fortunate. We're not a black box. We have actual physical assets and places and spaces. How can I use those to help trustees and advisors and pension funds be more comfortable? How can we help grow the whole nature-based economy?
Scalability is the challenge. So what pension funds struggle with is a combination of different things. They need to have often their investment advisor or investment consultant on board. So the problem is it isn't a direct sell to a pension fund, because in reality, whatever they invest in needs to be signed off, done due diligence by their investment consultant or advisor. So one of the key things is getting that community to make sure it forms part of their manager research, because often pension funds won't just act directly, and they won't necessarily do a direct investment. And many of the sorts of things that you're talking about will either be co-investment, a sort of a direct investment. It won't necessarily be through a traditional investment vehicle. And most pension funds will invest through investment vehicles. It'll be a very kind of institutional process. So one of the things we need to do is, as an industry, we need to create product that allows them to invest into that. But the other thing is we need to educate and support them so that if there are opportunities, they can do that. So for instance, we can help them with the due diligence, like front the due diligence costs to make it work for them. Most of them will say like due diligence costs could be 50 to 75 grand. So, it's not, this is the other thing. It isn't just returns. That's what people make the mistake on thinking. It's not just that. There's a whole range of different things that lead up to that. And we've talked about this. Can you actually create a coalition of individual pension funds that all want to invest into something, and by sharing the due diligence costs, you can make that happen? It's about finding someone who can who be the broker, and help bring those different assets together. And often it's not in the interest of the asset manager to do that. And the asset manager will have and when I say asset manager, I know that you're managing assets. That's a very different thing to what a lot of asset managers
You're absolutely right. And I think that language is actually causing us some challenges, because for us, our workbook in terms that models the activities we do across a site has 2,000 lines in it, from filling potholes to managing livestock to planting trees and things. But when you talk to the finance sector, asset management is 0.5% because it's someone who oversees the performance of a business. It's causing us issues in terms of language.
Yes.
Because people, how on earth can it be so expensive to do that? Are you clear on the health and safety of managing 140 built properties? Yeah. It's not asset management, but it is. So I think we've got an issue with language we need to address.
Yeah. So there's that aspect. And obviously, as soon as you bring in an asset manager to create an investment vehicle for your assets that you're managing, there will be terms involved in that may strip away, some of the benefit. So I think, and we have heard that from people who do manage sites. It could be with social housing, it could be, with natural capital, that it's very, very hard to work with managers. And it's not surprising that there aren't many new asset management firms that launch. To become FCA authorised is incredibly difficult and stringent. So what's typically happening at the moment, and I think is causing barriers, is that most pension funds, because of the limit around time that they have available, will decide to go back to their incumbent manager and find some solution via them, versus going to a new, because it means lots of additional work, lots of due diligence, lots of research, lots of time.
We met an amazing master trust pension fund. They were really exciting. And this was one of my early meetings with the financial world. And I didn't know what a master trust was at this point.
Yeah.
And this person was wonderful, met them. They just started quizzing me with questions, more. And their face lit up about, you mean you've modelled this and you can do this? And okay. Unbeknownst to me, this person went away to their trustee board and said, these people are a decade ahead of everyone else. We need to buy them or give them whatever money they need now. They're doing it.
Yeah.
And his trustee board laughed at him. He was like, that's a startup of 20 people. We cannot possibly do that. A year later, I hear this story, and great friends with this person now. We're having some wonderful conversations around it. But that's the challenge they were facing. Exactly that, because it just was too different and too much of a leap.
But also, I think what people are missing is that this is all new territory. Choosing investments to make for pension funds in the past was about tried and tested. You've got we want to see your track record. It has to be at least a sort of 5-year track record, 10-year track record. You can't have a track record in this. No. This is all new. So you have to have a forward-thinking approach. You have to be able to do things differently, i.e. Be willing to blend return. So one of the big issues is we'll go to a pension fund and they'll say, okay, we're really interested in the solution, but we want a single manager, single strategy solution. Why? Why? How that constrains you so much that you ultimately can't make the investment. And that's the problem. That's what the outcome then is. You don't make the investment. But we need to understand why people are making these decisions. Now, just so most people are aware, pension funds 9 times out of 10 won't understand what an evergreen investment is, semi-evergreen. They don't necessarily understand what open-ended, closed-ended. This is all just there's so much jargon in our industry. And then they won't understand, well, how does that tie to incentives or what we're trying to achieve from a sustainability perspective? Like, how do the fund terms marry with what we're trying to achieve, as a pension fund? So we've had interviews with a whole range of pension funds where they just really don't actually have much of an idea about private investments, full stop. So we're already assuming far too much. I think that's part of the issue. And that's another reason why Pensions for Purpose exists. So we have a community of members, but a lot of what we do is around education and training. So we bring people in to do all member events on particular issues, areas, whether it's natural capital. So we've done research on that, to actually understand in practice what's happening and where there are gaps, because there's also the theory and then there's what's actually happening. And so we need to get them to also think about doing things differently. The other thing is it's a very kind of rigid industry, run largely by actuaries who set risk and return targets that aren't necessarily the right risk and return targets for the pension fund, and you end up also being constrained by benchmarking. Most pension funds will have to have some kind of public benchmark or RPI plus. And that, again, really, really constrains you, because what you need is an unconstrained...
You can't benchmark innovation.
No, exactly.
Imagine if you benchmarked Google in the early 1990s, you'd be benchmarking it against the Yellow Pages.
But what they have to understand is, and I've been trying to kind of emphasise this, with auto-enrolment now, pension funds are society. They're a bellwether. So if a pension fund was to look at the demographics of their underlying members and to see where there are inequalities, they would actually be able to present the industry with information about the things we need to target, potential issues coming down the road. But we don't see pensions like that. And that's what these sorts of investments are like. You're not just investing for the return, you're investing to understand the data so that you can better improve your investment process and your investments over time. So you can't value the investment just on the return that you get. It's also by the data that it mines and it captures.
Has anyone ever asked you how you think? And what I mean is that how do thoughts move through your mind? So, to give you an example, one of our board members, brilliant gentleman, he thinks in long, sweeping curves, like a sine wave or something. If a thought is shared, it has been considered, developed, and it's finished. If you give me a word, my brain goes firework display. Bang, and I have to decide which of those 20 branches I'm following, and then they're off in 20 and they're off in 20. And I've tried describing this to people, but I can't speak them fast enough about the option it's giving me, and it goes. So I have to try and go, which one am I following? How does your brain work with thoughts?
I studied neuropsychology as part of my undergraduate degree, and this was the thing that made me understand my brain and how I think in the best way, I think, which is anybody who knows how the brain is constructed know that we've got, axons, you've got neural connections. And part of the reason why I have such an issue with drugs is that it actually interferes with the electrical connections, the synapses in your brain. So anything that interferes with that actually creates all sorts of problems, which is why it leads to things like Huntington's and Parkinson's disease, Alzheimer's, all these other things. But when you actually look at the process of that, the firing of neurons and the connections, that is how I think about my brain. It goes off a bit like you said, like fireworks. So somebody puts across something, it might not even be in the area I'm thinking about, but my head just goes, that's linked to this thing, to that thing, to that. And the problem is that I go, right, we need to connect this, and this thing. And most people are saying to me, Charlotte, I can't keep up with how you're thinking about that. You need to take it in linear steps. So I don't think linearly. And that's why this is like the best job for me. I didn't know at the time when I was in all these different jobs, I didn't know that what I wanted to say is I want to be the chief exec. Because
I didn't know what chief exec was.
because also what's the precursor?
Yeah.
How do I get experience for that role? And also, if you don't come from that background where it's assumed that of course you can have that role, you can just, but when I got the opportunity, it's like it's just completely opened up for me because I'm very, very good at problem solving, conflict resolution, identifying and balancing out teams, seeing where skills match each other. So it's good operationally, but it's also good in terms of looking at systemic solutions. So I've got the best business. I've got loads of stakeholders, over 400 organizations, loads of different stakeholders. And I literally go around looking at, getting all of the information in, and then my brain just goes boom, 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 boom. And I go, this is what's leading to this problem over here, to this problem here. And I connect all those different things, which is why when I suggested that actually one of the best things to get pension funds to change would be to actually align company director responsibilities with people and planet alongside profit, was because I'd gone, well, actually, pension funds have sponsors who are companies. So they're the people that are backing the pension fund. They've got trustees who are professional trustee firms, they're companies. They invest in asset managers, they're companies, and they have investment consultants, they're companies, legal firms are companies. The assets they invest in are companies. The common denominator here is companies. And the mismatch we've got is between long-term thinking by the pension fund, short-term thinking by all of the actors outside. So one of the things I supported early on was the Better Business Act, and actually saying company directors need to be responsible and accountable for the impact they're having on people and planet. Otherwise, this doesn't work. And so I'm very, very good at going, here are all the different problems. Here's a way of finding one united solution that helps scale what we're doing far more quickly.
Awesome. How do you hope the investment sector changes over the next 10 years?
What I would really like to see is a shift and rebalancing in power across the system. I think and believe that asset managers and investment consultants have far too much power in terms of dictating what asset owners do. And asset owners have not recognised the power that they have to actually go to the market and ask for solutions. I think we need to change this idea and mentality about asset owners being market takers and being market makers. That mindset shift would be massive. And what sort of encouraged me in this is that there was Friends Provident Foundation did what they call an ESG Olympics. So they did an open tender process, public process, where they said, this is what we want in an ESG investment product. Not, you come to us with all the different products that you have and tell us how you can meet. They said, no. Can you create something that meets our requirements? And it can't be something that necessarily already exists. It can't be something that loosely fits what we want. But what was interesting about it is that they then offered for other asset owners to come in with them, and they did it in public. So the beauty parade with managers happened in public. And I thought that was really, really fascinating. We need to have that shift in mentality about understanding that it's the asset owners that dictate how the market moves. And that is the way I think we resolve some of these issues around climate change, biodiversity loss, inequality.
You've literally just changed the way we're going to do a competition around selling our natural capital. So we're trying to debate at the minute whether we build an internal team to sell our natural capital products or whether we work with a third party, a broker, or whatever that looks like. And I was going to put an invitation to partner out. So I hate the word tender because it means cheap. So it suppresses the quality of everything. So we don't use the word. And we were going to ask the market what they could provide. It's the wrong question. We know what we want to sell in terms of a product. So who can deliver to this spec? I love it. Charlotte, it's been one of the most fascinating firework-esque conversations because our brains clearly work that way. Thank you so much for coming in. I would love to do a part 2 at some point because I think we've got so much to discuss.
Yeah, thank you so much. It's been eye-opening for me as well.
It's a pleasure. Thanks. Bye, guys.